The pastor had a voice that filled the room the way good smoke fills a room slow, even, and by the time you noticed it, already in your lungs. "This community loves Walter Dean," Elijah Crane said from the pulpit. He paused the way a man pauses when he wants you to hear the, "but that is coming." But love sometimes means making hard choices on behalf of those who cannot make them for themselves. I was sitting in the third row of First Baptist Church of Magnolia Springs, Alabama, wearing a barber's apron over a clean white shirt. The apron was $12. I had bought it 4 years ago when I opened the shop and had not replaced it because it did not need replacing. There were scissors in the front pocket. The hem was frayed, and it smelled like the clove and citrus shaving oil I had used since before most people in this room were born. Reginald Cross, the attorney they had brought up from Birmingham, sat at the front table with a briefcase that cost more than my monthly rent. He had spent 35 minutes laying out a case against me. Words like declining cognitive function and financial insufficiency. Photographs of my shop, taken on the one day in November when the gutters needed cleaning. A report signed by Dr. Evelyn Parks, who had been my physician for 6 years and who had, apparently, never met me. The room they chose was not a courtroom. It was a church, with wooden pews and colored glass and a ceiling fan turning too slowly to do any good. Community hearing, they had called it, a formality before the guardianship filing moved to Monroe County Court. 40 years of faces in this town, and now those faces were turned toward a man from Birmingham who was explaining who I was. Crane stepped down from the pulpit. He had the gift of looking directly at a person when he spoke, the way certain men do, the way that feels like attention until you understand it is something else entirely. "We are not here to condemn Walter," he said. "We are here because Ruby deserves a stable home. She deserves consistency. She deserves more than a man who is, through no fault of his own, simply," he stopped. The expression of a doctor delivering news he wishes were different. No longer the man he was. Someone behind me made a sound. Agreement or sympathy. Hard to say which. I kept my hands flat on my knees. My hands are not the hands of a man who cuts hair. They are broad across the knuckles. The left thumb carries a scar from a chain-link fence in Memphis in 1998. There is a callus along the inside of my right index finger that has been there so long I have forgotten what caused it. 4 years in this town as a barber. My hands remember what I was before that. Lorraine sat in the front pew in the blue dress she had bought the spring before Sarah got sick. She had not looked at me once in 90 minutes. This was information. Lorraine has always told more truth with the direction of her eyes than with anything she says. Crane was still speaking. I let the words move past me the way you let traffic move past when you are waiting to cross. He said broken. He said struggling. He said Ruby needs more than this good man can give her right now. Every word was grammatically correct and wrong in every other way. The ceiling fan turned. I looked at my hands. For 25 years, I carried a badge. For 25 years, I sat across tables from men who were certain they had the room, men with lawyers and leverage and, on 2 occasions, sitting United States congressmen in their corners. In 25 years, I never lost a room I had prepared for. I had been preparing for this one for 2.5 years. Crane finished. The room exhaled the way audiences exhale when they believe they have just watched the conclusion of something. Cross straightened his tie. Lorraine folded her hands. Judge Margaret Ashford looked at me over her reading glasses. Not a church elder, a sitting Monroe County judge who also served as a deacon at First Baptist. And she had been on that bench long enough to know the difference between a man with nothing to say and a man choosing when to say it. Mr. Dean, do you have anything you would like to say for yourself? I looked at the room, at Hattie Mae Johnson in the 5th row, 82 years old, 15 acres of family land that had nearly been taken by a piece of paper she almost signed. At Jimmy Polk near the back door, arms crossed, which is how Jimmy stands when he does not trust a room but cannot say why. At Crane, watching me with the patient expression of a man who has run this play before and knows how it ends. They looked at me and saw a barber in a $12 apron, alone, no attorney, no briefcase, hands that smelled of clove oil and old leather. That was exactly what I needed them to see. Yes, Your Honor, I said. But I would like to start at the beginning, if you do not mind. She nodded. The beginning was not this church. It was a Tuesday, 3 years ago, when a man I had never met walked into my barber shop, shook my hand, and told me he was sorry about my daughter. I remember thinking his handshake is too good, but this story did not start in that church. So let me take you back to where it did. The barber shop on Elm Street had one chair, one mirror, and every secret in Magnolia Springs. This is not an exaggeration. In a town of 1,400 people, the barber shop is the last honest room. Men sit in that chair with a cape around their neck and clippers near their ear, and they talk. They always talk about their wives, their money troubles, their bad knees and worse neighbors, about things they would never say in a church or a courthouse or across a kitchen table. There is something about the chair and the cape and the man standing behind you with scissors that makes people believe, for a few minutes, that the normal rules of discretion do not apply. I had been listening to this town for 4 years. The shop itself was small, one room, with a black and white tile floor my father had laid in 1961, and that I had never replaced because it was still good. The barber chair was red leather, original to the shop, with a chrome footrest I polished every Sunday whether it needed it or not. There was a mirror behind the chair that ran the full length of the wall, and in that mirror you could see everything: the chair, the client, the street through the front window, and the corner near the back where Ruby sat. Ruby was 9 years old that first autumn. She was Sarah's daughter, which made her mine when Sarah was gone, and she had been mine for 8 months by the time this story began. She came to the shop every day after school and would set her backpack against the wall, take out her sketchbook and her pencils, and draw for 2 hours without speaking a thing I had never seen a 9-year-old do before Ruby. She drew everything: the chair, the window, the street, the customers who came and went, their faces rendered in careful pencil lines with a patience borrowed from someone older. She dated each drawing in the top right corner of the page, which she had started doing on her own, without my asking. Sarah had been like that too, quiet in a way that was not shyness but attention. I used to tell her she saw more than she let on. She used to say that was a family trait. She was not wrong. Sarah died of pancreatic cancer on a Thursday in March, 2 years before the hearing, 11 months after the diagnosis. She was 34 years old. Ruby's father had been gone since before Ruby could remember. On the afternoon, I brought Ruby home from the hospital. She carried one backpack and a stuffed rabbit and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, simply, Okay. As if she had already run through the alternatives, and this was the one that made sense. She reminded me of myself. I was not sure, at the time, whether that was a comfort or a warning. Lorraine was still home then. She had taken Sarah's death the way Lorraine took most things, with a grief that turned inward and stayed there, becoming something quieter and more permanent than crying. She cooked. She cleaned. She drove Ruby to school in the mornings and to the shop in the afternoons. And in the evenings, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she did not finish and looked at a point on the wall that had nothing on it. By October, she had found the church, in Magnolia Springs, in times of loss. The church is where people go. I did not think anything of it. It was a Tuesday in November when Otis Freeman came in for his regular cut. Otis had been sitting in my chair every other Tuesday for 11 years. He was 78, a retired schoolteacher, and he had the particular dignity of a man who has spent his life being underestimated and made his peace with it. We talked about the weather and the high school football team, which had lost 3 games in a row and showed no signs of improvement. Near the end of the cut, Otis said something I filed away and did not yet understand. "That new pastor came by the house again," he said. "3rd time this month." I kept the clippers moving. "Pastor Crane brought those papers again. The trust deed thing." He was quiet for a moment. "I told Mildred not to sign anything until I talked to somebody. She gets nervous when I say that. Says I'm being ungrateful." "You're not being ungrateful." "Otis." He was quiet again. In the mirror, I watched his face, the careful stillness of a man turning something over that he has not finished turning. "Suppose not," he said finally. "Still, something about those papers sits wrong with me." I finished the cut and handed him the mirror. He looked at himself with the small, satisfied nod of a man who knows what he is supposed to look like and is relieved to still look that way. After he left, Ruby came over from her corner with her sketchbook open. On the page was a drawing of Otis done from her seat 20 feet away. The slope of his shoulders, the particular way he held his chin when he was thinking, the crease on the right side of his forehead that deepened when he was worried. She had captured all of it. "Is this accurate?" she asked. I looked at the drawing for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly right." She considered this with the careful nod of someone whose theory has just been confirmed. Then she went back to her corner and opened to a new page. The next morning, I went to a craft store in Mobile and bought her a proper set of brushes and 4 colors of paint. I told her it was for fun. It wasn't entirely for fun. There is a version of me that exists in federal records, in closed case files, in the memories of men who are currently incarcerated in 6 different states. That version of me did not cut hair. I want to tell you who I actually am, because everything that follows depends on it. My name is Walter James Dean. For 25 years, I served as a Deputy United States Marshal out of the Southern District of Alabama. I specialized in 2 things: fugitive apprehension and identity fraud. The first is straightforward. You find people who do not want to be found, and you bring them back. The second is more particular. Identity fraud, at the level I worked, is not a man using a stolen credit card. It is a man who has become someone else, entirely new name, new history, new community, and who has been that person for so long that the original self has effectively ceased to exist. My job was to find the seam. Every false identity has one. A small inconsistency in how a man pronounces a word, a slight hesitation before answering a question he should know the answer to, a handshake that is practiced rather than natural. You cannot fake the things you never learned. You can only approximate them, and approximation has a texture that a trained eye can feel. I retired in January, 4 years before the hearing. Sarah had been diagnosed in February of the previous year, and by October I understood that the diagnosis was not something she was going to outlast. I put in my papers on a Monday and drove to Mobile on Tuesday and sat in her kitchen and told her I was done working. She looked at me across her kitchen table the way she had looked at me since she was about 6 years old, with the patient, slightly skeptical expression of someone who loves you completely and does not entirely believe you. "You don't have to do that, Dad," she said. "I know," I said. We did not discuss it further. I moved into the guest room. I drove her to treatments. I cooked the things she could still eat, which changed from week to week and required attention. I learned, at 60 years of age, how to make a soup that did not taste like the effort that had gone into it. I read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to hold a book. I sat in the dark of the hallway outside her room some nights when she was having a bad time and could not sleep, and I did not go in because she had asked me not to, and I did not leave because I could not. She died on a Thursday. Ruby came to live with us the following Saturday. I opened the barber shop 6 weeks later because I needed somewhere to be during the hours Ruby was at school, and because my father had run that shop for 31 years, and the chair and the mirror and the smell of shaving oil were the closest thing I had to a version of myself that predated all of this. I did not expect it to become anything more than that. A man's skills do not retire when he does. I had spent 25 years learning to read rooms and people and the small spaces between what someone says and what they mean. Sitting behind that chair, I found that the skills had simply relocated. The barbershop was quieter than a federal operation and considerably less dangerous, but the fundamental work listening, observing, filing was the same. This is important. This is why what happened next happened the way it did. Elijah Crane came to Sarah's funeral. He had been in Magnolia Springs for 3 weeks. He was the new pastor at First Baptist, recently arrived from somewhere in Mississippi, and he had apparently made it his practice to attend the funerals of congregants' family members, even when he had not met the deceased. Lorraine had mentioned him once or twice. I had not paid attention. He found me at the reception afterward. He was tall, well-dressed in the particular way of men who understand that a minister's clothing is a form of communication not expensive, but precise. He had silver at his temples and the kind of face that reads as trustworthy from a distance. The lines arranged in a way that suggested experience rather than age. He shook my hand and said he was sorry about Sarah. I thanked him. He said she sounded like a remarkable woman, which is the thing people say when they did not know the person they are consoling you about. And then he said a few words about faith and endurance that were correct in their theology, and came out of his mouth with the smoothness of something recited rather than believed. Then he moved on to the next person in the room. I stood there for a moment with the feeling of the handshake still in my hand. It was a good handshake. Not too firm, not too soft. The exact right duration. The thumb positioned correctly. The eye contact held for precisely the appropriate number of seconds. I have shaken 10,000 hands in 25 years of federal work, and I can tell you that nobody who shakes a hand that well learned it naturally. That handshake had been practiced the way an actor practices a scene deliberately, repeatedly, until it no longer felt like performance. It felt like performance. I looked across the room at him moving through the crowd, saying the right things to the right people, the hand on the shoulder at the right moment, the nod at the right interval. I filed the handshake the way I used to file evidence, in a drawer I did not open again for 7 months. I was not ready yet. I was a man who had just buried his daughter and was learning to make soup and raise a 9-year-old. The drawer could wait, but the drawer was there. Elijah Crane preached the way a man sells real estate, every word an investment in something you did not know you were buying. By February, 3 months after Sarah's funeral, he had become the kind of presence in Magnolia Springs that a town absorbs without questioning. He visited the sick. He organized a food drive that filled the fellowship hall with more canned goods than the county food bank had seen in a decade. He knew every name and used them correctly, and in a town where the previous pastor had served 30 years and called people by their first names reflexively, without looking, this felt like something. He had a gift for the specific compliment, the observation that told you he had noticed you, truly noticed you, and found what he saw worth remarking on. People trusted him quickly. This is not a criticism of the people. It is a fact about the particular kind of man he was. Lorraine asked me to come to church with her in February. I went once. I sat in the third pew and listened to Crane preach on endurance and trust. He was good, I will give him that. He had a voice that moved through registers the way a musician moves through chords, low and certain when he wanted you to feel the weight of something, higher and open when he wanted you to feel possibility. He told a story about a man walking across a desert on nothing but willingness, and he told it so well that the man felt real. The desert felt hot. And by the end, there was not a dry eye in the room. Near the close of the sermon, he quoted from 2 Corinthians, the verse about being hard-pressed on every side. It is a verse I know, because my mother quoted it to me more than once in my childhood, and because I have had, in this life, more occasion than I would have liked to think about it. He got it slightly wrong. A single word transposed, a small shift in the rhythm of the phrase. Most people would not notice. Most people do not carry their scripture with the precision of someone raised by a woman who treated the King James Bible as a document to be memorized rather than summarized. I noticed. I filed it in the drawer that was already getting crowded. Ruby had come with us that Sunday. She sat between Lorraine and me and drew in her small notebook. Afterward, in the car. She held up the page Crane at the pulpit, the posture, the slight forward lean he used when making a point, rendered with her usual accuracy. In the margin, in her small, careful handwriting, she had written one note. His watch is different from last Sunday. I looked at the note, then at Lorraine, who was watching the road. Good eye, I said to Ruby. She put the notebook away. Over the following months, Lorraine's involvement with the church grew the way meaningful changes grow invisibly, until you look back and try to find when the direction shifted. She volunteered for the hospitality committee, then the outreach committee, then something called the ministry administration team, which involved considerable time in the church office with Crane and paperwork she brought home in the evenings and worked through at the kitchen table. She began using his phrases. This happens with people who spend time in the orbit of a compelling speaker. Their language starts absorbing the other person's rhythms. Lorraine had always spoken plainly, with the directness of a woman who says what she means because she has never found decoration useful. Now she talked about purpose and alignment and community investment, with the slightly distant look of someone reciting a lesson not yet fully absorbed. I watched Crane at church events when Lorraine brought me along. He wore a different watch every Sunday, not extravagantly different. Not the kind of thing most people would track, but consistently, quietly different. A silver band one week, a darker face the next, brown leather, then black. He drove a car that was too new for a pastor's salary in a town this size and explained it when someone asked, with a vague reference to a church vehicle fund that nobody thought to verify because nobody had a reason to. In April, Lorraine told me the church was starting something called the Community Trust Ministry, a program to help elderly homeowners protect their family land through church-administered trust arrangements. Crane had developed it in response to the number of older congregants who had no estate planning in place and were at risk of losing property to taxes or predatory lenders. It sounded reasonable. It was designed to sound reasonable. I asked Lorraine a few questions about how the arrangements worked. She answered with the particular fluency of someone who had been briefed rather than someone who had independently understood. I nodded and did not ask more. That evening she said something I have thought about many times since. The church gives me something you never could. Walter. A future. She said it without cruelty. That was the part that stayed with me. She was not trying to wound me. She was simply stating a fact as she understood it. The way you state the weather. I washed the dinner dishes. I dried them. I set them on the rack. I did not say what 25 years of reading people had already told me about a man who misquotes Corinthians and wears a different watch every Sunday and drives a car he cannot explain. The drawer was getting very full. Otis Freeman had been sitting in my chair every other Tuesday for 11 years. On this particular Tuesday, his hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor of old age. Otis was 78, and his hands were steady in the way of a man who has spent his life doing precise, careful work. This was something else. He sat down and put his hands in his lap and looked at them the way a man looks at tools that have started behaving in a way he does not understand. I put the cape on him and asked about Mildred. "She's fine," he said. "She's been fine." He paused. "I need to show you something." He reached inside his jacket and produced an envelope, the kind that comes from a legal office, thin paper. A return address in the corner printed in the particular font that legal correspondence uses, which is not quite any other font and is designed to communicate authority without warmth. He held it out to me. The return address read, Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, an address in Wilmington, Delaware. The letter inside was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph welcomed Otis as a trust beneficiary participant. The second paragraph confirmed the successful transfer of his property, 12 acres on County Road 41, owned by the Freeman family since 1912 into the Community Trust, administered by Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, as per the agreement signed on June the 14th. The third paragraph explained the terms under which he could petition to access his own land. I read it twice. I handed it back to him. "Did you sign something in June?" I asked. "The church papers," he said. "The trust deed thing. Pastor Crane said it would protect the land, put it in a community trust so the tax people couldn't touch it, so it would go to my grandchildren without all the legal problems." He folded the letter along its original crease. He made it sound like doing nothing was the riskier choice. "Did you read the documents before you signed them?" Otis was quiet for a moment. Mildred read some of it. I read some of it. There was a lot of it. He looked at his hands again. It sounded like what he said it was. I finished his haircut. I did not say what I was thinking because what I was thinking required more information than I currently had, and because saying it to Otis before I had that information would either alarm him unnecessarily or, if I was right, alert him in a way that might alert others. I told him I would look into it. I told him not to sign anything else, and not to talk to Crane about the letter until he heard from me. He nodded. He paid. He left. I watched him walk to his truck, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man carrying weight that is not physical. Ruby was in her corner. She had been drawing throughout the conversation, as she always was, present and quiet in the way that made most adults forget she was in the room. I made a note of this, as I always did. That evening, after Ruby was in bed, I sat at the desk I kept in the back room of the shop and opened my laptop. I had not used certain channels since before I retired, but the connections do not expire the way employment does. And a man who spent 25 years in federal work does not lose his access so much as he stops using it. The registered agent for Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, was a law firm in Wilmington, Delaware, one that served as registered agent for approximately 3,200 other companies. The business address was a mailbox at a commercial mail center on a street I did not need to look up. The listed principals were two names I did not recognize. I opened a second window. The law firm appeared twice in the U.S. Marshal Service's peripheral database, not flagged, not active, but noted. Associated with a financial structure that had been flagged for review 8 years ago in connection with a land fraud operation in rural Tennessee. The case had been closed when the primary subject relocated and could not be found. I opened a third window. The Tennessee case involved a man who had posed as a financial advisor to a rural church community and had used fraudulent trust deed instruments to transfer property titles to shell companies. The man's name in the Tennessee case was not Elijah Crane, but the method the church, the trust ministry, the elderly homeowners, the documents that sounded reasonable until you understood what they actually said was the same method. It was a recognizable shape, the way all fraud has a recognizable shape once you have seen enough of it. I sat at that desk for a long time. 12 acres on County Road 41 that had been in the Freeman family since 1912. Land that Otis's grandfather had worked and paid for and deeded to his children. That had passed through 3 generations and carried the particular weight of things that cost more than money. I thought about the trust ministry announcement, about how many Sundays Crane had preached in this town, about how many elderly congregants, how many families with land they had owned for generations and lawyers they could not afford, had sat in those pews and trusted the man at the front. I closed the laptop. I turned off the desk lamp. I sat in the dark of the back room with my hands flat on the desk in front of me, the same hands that were not the hands of a barber, the same hands that remembered exactly what they were trained to do. For the first time in 4 years, I thought like a marshal. The man who called himself Elijah Crane came into the barbershop on a Wednesday morning in December, 3 weeks after Otis Freeman showed me the letter from Meridian Property Holdings. He came in the way he did everything, unhurried, composed, with the particular ease of a man who has spent considerable time learning how to enter rooms. He said good morning. He said he had been meaning to come by for weeks. He sat in the chair, and we talked about the weather and the church Christmas program and the county's plans to repave the road on the south end of town. And I cut his hair with the same attention I gave every customer and asked him questions that sounded like small talk and were not. He accepted the glass of water I offered without hesitation. He held it for a moment, set it on the shelf beside the chair, and did not touch it again. When he left, I wrapped the glass in a clean towel and put it in the back room. Ruby looked up from her sketchbook, then looked back down. She did not ask about the glass. That evening I drove to Jimmy Polk's garage. Jimmy Polk is the only mechanic in Magnolia Springs, which means he knows every vehicle in the county and has opinions about all of them. He is also, in the particular way of men who have spent their lives in small towns, a person who notices things without appearing to. He had mentioned twice in the past month that a black SUV with out-of-county plates had been parking near the church at odd hours early morning, late at night, and that he did not recognize it. I asked Jimmy to run the plate the next time he saw the vehicle. He asked me why. I told him I was curious. He looked at me for a moment the way Jimmy looks at things he has already decided he is not going to ask about, and then said he would see what he could do. I drove back to the shop. The shop was dark and quiet when I got there. Ruby was long since in bed. The town was the kind of silent it gets at 9 in the evening when there is nothing particular happening, which in Magnolia Springs is most evenings. I sat at the desk in the back room and opened the laptop. That night, I processed the glass. I will not detail the specific method. Because it is not mine to detail, I will say only that a man who spent 25 years in federal work does not forget certain procedures the way he forgets where he left his keys. The latent prints on the glass were clear. I photographed them and transmitted the images through a channel I had not used in 4 years, to a contact who had been at the Marshal Service longer than I had, and who owed me a courtesy I had never previously called in. The response came back in 6 hours. The prints did not match any person named Elijah Crane. There was no Elijah Crane in the National Fingerprint Database at all. There was, however, a person named Elijah James Crane in the Mississippi death records, a retired Baptist minister from Vicksburg who had died of a stroke 9 years ago at the age of 74. He had been a real man. He had preached for 40 years and was survived by 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, none of whom knew that someone had borrowed his name and was using it to steal land from old people in Alabama. The prints I had submitted matched a different name entirely. Darren Lee Foley. Date of birth, February the 3rd, 1971, 5 feet 11. Last known weight, 188 pounds. The photograph in the record was 12 years old, shorter hair. No silver at the temples, but the structure of the face was not something that changed with age or hair color. I had been cutting that face for 20 minutes that morning. Darren Foley had 3 active warrants across 2 states: Georgia wire fraud, identity theft, theft by deception. Mississippi, 2 counts of fraudulent conveyance of property, 1 count of impersonating a religious official. In each case, the record noted the same detail in the investigating officer's comments, subject relocated prior to arrest. Current whereabouts unknown. Current whereabouts Magnolia Springs, Alabama. First Baptist Church. The pulpit. Every Sunday. I sat at the desk for a long time. 3 documented towns before this one. A method refined over years to near invisibility: the church, the ministry, the trust documents, the elderly homeowners who trusted the man behind the pulpit, because that is what you do. The Tennessee case I had found the previous night was not in the warrant records. There had been a 4th town, possibly more. He had been doing this longer than the warrants reflected, and each time he had gotten more careful and more convincing. Jimmy called the next morning. The black SUV was registered to a company in Atlanta, Palmetto Advisory Group. He had the plate number, the registration address, and, because Jimmy is Jimmy, a phone photograph taken from across the street. The driver stepping out caught in 3/4 profile was a man I had seen twice in Crane's church. He had the look of someone whose job it was to confirm that things were running on schedule. Palmetto Advisory Group appeared in the same peripheral records as Meridian Property Holdings. Shared registered agent in Delaware. Same structure, different name. Foley was not working alone. I knew what he was. The question was whether I could prove what he had done before he did what he always did disappear. And this time, I had a reason he had not counted on. This time, there was Ruby. A barbershop is not a place where people come to be questioned. That is precisely why it works. In an interrogation room, a person knows they are being studied. They arrange themselves accordingly, careful word choices, controlled posture, the particular awareness of someone who understands that everything they say is being recorded and evaluated. A barbershop is the opposite. A man comes in, sits down, submits to the physical vulnerability of another person standing above him with a blade near his ear, and his defenses drop in ways he does not notice because he is thinking about the weather and his neighbor's fence dispute and whether his wife was right about the alternator. He talks, and the man behind him, scissors in hand, listens. For the next 3 months, I listened with everything I had. The work was not dramatic. That is the thing about real investigative work that fiction always gets wrong. The texture of it is repetition. The same chair, the same questions asked from different angles, the same careful accumulation of small facts that do not mean anything alone and mean everything together. I kept a log in a notebook I stored in a lockbox in the back room, and every evening after closing, I added the day's information to the map I was building. By February, the map had 8 families confirmed. 8 sets of signatures on documents that transferred title to property collectively representing more than 90 acres of family land. Most of it held for multiple generations to Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, and 2 related shell entities. The documents had been presented as protective trust instruments. They were not protective. They were transfers of ownership, written in language designed to obscure that fact for long enough that the signing period would pass. 6 more families were in active conversations with Foley about the ministry program. 6 more sets of signatures pending. I warned each one I could reach without drawing attention. Not directly, I did not tell any of them what I knew about Foley, because that information was not ready to be spoken aloud. What I did was ask questions. Has anyone looked at those papers with an independent attorney? Have you checked with the county recorder's office about what exactly is being transferred? Would you like me to give you the name of someone in Mobile who handles estate planning? Some of them listened. Some of them, who had already decided to trust Crane, heard my questions as skepticism of a man they respected and did not take them as intended. I could not force the issue without revealing my hand. Ruby had filled 2 sketchbooks by March. I had taken to scanning the pages every Sunday night, building a separate digital file I kept on an encrypted drive. She had drawn Crane 17 times across those 2 books at the pulpit, at church events, once through the barbershop window when he passed on the sidewalk outside. The drawings were always accurate. What had begun to accumulate in the margins were notes I had not asked her to take. March the 7th, he was on the phone outside the fellowship hall. He turned away from the parking lot when he saw me watching. March the 19th, the man in the gray suit came again. They did not go inside. March the 23rd, he is wearing the silver watch today. He wore it the last time the gray suit man came. She was 9 years old. She had correlated the watch to the associate's visits without being asked to look for a pattern. Without, as far as I could tell, understanding that there was a pattern to find. I thought about saying something to her. I decided not to. What she was doing naturally, and the moment I acknowledged it as something more than a game was the moment it would become something else, something that carried weight she was too young to carry. She would learn the weight of it soon enough. Hattie Mae Johnson lived on County Road 12 in a house her grandfather had built in 1922. She was 82 years old with 20 acres of bottomland. She had no children living nearby, no attorney, and the independence of a woman who had spent 82 years solving her own problems and did not easily accept outside help. Foley had been visiting her every other week since January. I drove out on a Thursday afternoon in April. She was on the porch when I pulled up, shelling butter beans into a colander with the focused efficiency of a woman for whom things that needed doing got done. She looked up at me with the expression she had been using on people who arrived unannounced since approximately 1965. "Walter Dean," she said. "What do you want?" I sat on the step below her and told her I had heard the pastor had been coming by. She confirmed this without enthusiasm. I asked if he had brought paperwork. She said he had. I asked if she had signed anything. She gave me a long look over the colander. "Not yet," she said. I told her not to. Not until she had shown the papers to someone she trusted, who was also an attorney. She looked at me for another moment, evaluating, and I felt the particular experience of being assessed by someone who has been reading people for 8 decades and is under no obligation to reach a favorable conclusion. "I appreciate the visit," she said finally, "but I need to understand why you're telling me this." I said what I could say, which was not everything. "Because those papers aren't what he says they are. Hattie, that's all I can tell you right now." She was quiet. She shelled 3 more butter beans with the same even motion. Then she looked at me. "Walter Dean," she said. "You sound like your father." It was the highest compliment available in Magnolia Springs. It was also the heaviest thing anyone had said to me in a long time, and I sat with it on the drive home. 30 years of marriage does not end with a fight. It ends with a suitcase packed so neatly you understand immediately that she has been thinking about this for a long time. Lorraine told me on a Sunday evening in May that she would be moving into the church rectory. The rectory had a guest suite that had recently been prepared for extended occupancy. She said this in the way of someone providing logistical information that has already been decided, not as part of a conversation that was still open. She had arranged for a week of substitute coverage at the elementary school, where she had taught 3rd grade for 18 years. She had called her sister in Tuscaloosa. She had, I understood, been thorough. I looked at the suitcase on the bed. It was the large one, the dark blue with the wheels that always stuck on the left side. It was packed the way a person packs when they have rehearsed it, not the compressed disorganization of someone moving fast, but the careful layering of someone who has decided exactly what they are taking and has taken only that. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. I asked if this was what she wanted. She said it was what she needed, which was not the same answer, but was, I understood, the honest one. We did not raise our voices. This was not because we were people who did not raise their voices over 30 years. We had had arguments of considerable volume about things considerably smaller than this. We were quiet because there was nothing left to argue about. The decision was made. The suitcase was packed. She had called her sister. Ruby was in the hallway. I did not know how long she had been standing there. She was in her pajamas with the small rabbit she still slept with tucked under one arm, and she was watching with the expression of a child who has understood what is happening and is deciding how to hold it. Lorraine saw her. She set down the toiletry bag she was carrying and crossed the room and crouched in front of Ruby the way you crouch when you need to be at someone's level. "Grandma loves you," she said. "That doesn't change." Ruby looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said. It was 2 words. It contained everything and it asked for nothing. And I have thought about it many times in the years since. I know. Not "I love you too." Not "please don't go." Not the protest of a child who does not understand. Just "I know." The quiet, complete acceptance of someone who has already processed what most people need time to process. She reminded me of myself. I was not sure, at that moment, whether this was still a comfort, or whether it had become something I owed her an apology for. Lorraine stood. She picked up the toiletry bag. She looked at me once, briefly, and I looked back. And 30 years passed in that exchange in the particular compressed way that long things can pass in a moment when both people are paying attention. She took the suitcase and she left. I made Ruby a glass of warm milk and sat with her at the kitchen table while she drank it. And we talked about her sketchbook and the mockingbird that had been nesting in the oak tree in the backyard. And I did not say anything about what had just happened, because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than the milk and the conversation about the mockingbird. After I put her to bed, I went back to the bedroom. Her closet door was open. The hangers on her side were spaced out now, filling gaps. The way hangers fill space when the clothes that separated them are gone. I closed the closet door. I went through the room the way I go through things, methodically, making sure everything was where it should be. On the chair by the window, she had left a cardigan she had worn around the house all winter gray, with a stretched pocket on the right side. She had forgotten it or decided not to take it. I picked it up to hang it, and something shifted in the pocket. I reached in and found a folded piece of paper. It was a small page, torn from a notepad, covered in handwriting that was not Lorraine's. A column of numbers, 12 digits, then a dash, then 4 more. Below it, a second set. Below that, a third. Routing numbers and account numbers, written in the deliberate hand of someone transcribing information they intend to use. The handwriting was precise and slanted slightly to the left. I had seen that handwriting on church ministry paperwork that Lorraine had brought home and left on the kitchen table. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. I hung the cardigan in the closet. I turned off the light. Ruby knocked on the door at 9:15. "Can I sleep in here tonight, Grandpa?" "Yes," I said. "Come on in." She was asleep in 4 minutes. I know this because I counted her breaths, the particular rhythm of a child going under. The small shifts from alert to drowsy to gone. Counting is what I do when I cannot afford to feel. I lay in the dark for a long time. The house had a different quality of quiet now. The same rooms, the same walls, the same ceiling fan that needed a new pull chain. But the quiet was different. And I understood that it would be different from this point forward regardless of what else happened. Some silences are neutral. This one had a shape. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Outside, the mockingbird was still. In my shirt pocket, folded along its original crease, was a piece of paper with 3 sets of numbers in Foley's handwriting. I would need to know what those accounts were. I would need to know what Lorraine had been signing. By June, I had 14 families. I want to give you that number without ornamentation, because it deserves to stand on its own. 14 families in Magnolia Springs and the surrounding county who had signed documents at First Baptist Church of Magnolia Springs under the guidance of a man named Darren Lee Foley, believing they were protecting their land for their children and grandchildren. 14 sets of signatures on instruments that had transferred title to their property, collectively representing just over 208 acres and an assessed value of approximately $2.8 million to Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, and its affiliated entities. 208 acres. Most of it family land. Most of it held for 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations. Some of it purchased by men and women who had worked jobs that did not pay enough to purchase land, and had purchased it anyway because they understood that land was the thing that could not be taken from you, until it could. The account numbers from Lorraine's cardigan traced to 2 business accounts at a regional bank in Atlanta, accounts registered to Palmetto Advisory Group, the same company whose SUV Jimmy had photographed outside the church. The accounts were not flagged. They were, on paper, unremarkable regular deposits in amounts consistent with consulting fees and administrative disbursements. The pattern only became visible when you looked at the source of the deposits, which traced back through an intermediary account to Meridian Property Holdings, which traced back to the trust deed transactions. It was a clean structure. Someone had built it with care. I needed someone with subpoena authority and a federal jurisdiction. I needed them to understand the scope before they moved, because if they moved wrong too early, too visibly, through the wrong channel, Foley would hear about it. He had run from 3 jurisdictions before. He knew what official interest looked like before most investigators knew they were showing it. Diana Marsh had been with the FBI field office in Birmingham for 11 years. Before that, she had spent 9 years at the Marshal Service, 4 of them overlapping with my tenure. And we had worked 2 fugitive cases together in the late years of my career with the kind of professional alignment that is rarer than most people realize, the shared instinct about when to move and when to wait, about which details matter and which are noise. She had left the Marshal Service for the FBI because the work suited her better, which I understood, and she had done well there, which I had followed at a distance without comment. I called her on a Tuesday evening from the back room of the shop, on a phone that was not my regular line. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Walter Dean," she said. "It's been a while." "It has. Are you calling because you need something or because you missed my voice?" "Both. Mostly the first." She was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone shifting from pleasantries into attention. "Tell me." I told her the outline. Not everything, not the account numbers, not the full property map, not the details I was still developing. Enough for her to understand the shape of it. When I finished, there was a silence of the kind that means someone is thinking, rather than the kind that means they are deciding whether to take you seriously. "Foley," she said. "I know that name from a Tennessee case that went cold." "There was a 4th town," I said. "Before Tennessee," another pause. "How long have you been sitting on this? Long enough to have something worth bringing?" "Walter." Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was choosing her words with care. "If this is what you're describing, this is not a one-man operation. Foley's organization has federal exposure across multiple states. The moment you file anything, the moment anyone with a badge asks a question in that county, he will know. He has run before." "I know." "Not how long do you need?" I thought about the 6 families still in active conversations with Foley about the ministry program. I thought about Hattie Mae Johnson on her porch with her butterbeans, not yet having signed. I thought about the account structure I still needed to finish mapping, and the two shell companies whose registered agents I had not yet fully traced. 4 months, I said. She was quiet again. I can hold the file for 4 months, she said. After that, if you haven't given me something I can move on, I'm going to have to make some calls on my own terms. Understood. Send me what you have so far. Encrypted. Use the channel from the Hendricks case. I said I would. She said to be careful. I said I would be that too. Which was something I had been saying for 25 years and had mostly managed to make true. After I hung up, I sat at the desk and looked at the notebook. 14 families. 208 acres. 4 months. I opened the shop the next morning at 7. The first customer was a retired postal worker who had been coming in every 3 weeks since I opened. The second was a man I did not know well who had recently started attending First Baptist. The third was Jimmy Polk, who needed a trim and wanted to talk about the alternator situation on a 1989 pickup that belonged to a man 2 streets over. 16 haircuts that week, 32 ears, and somewhere in those 32 ears, the one piece I was still missing. There are 2 kinds of betrayal. The kind where someone is deceived into hurting you, and the kind where someone sees the truth clearly and chooses to hurt you anyway. The first kind is a tragedy. The second kind is something else, and it takes longer to name. Jimmy did some electrical work at the church in July. He had done electrical work there before Foley had called him twice about circuit issues in the fellowship hall. And Jimmy was, as I have said, the only mechanic in Magnolia Springs, which extended in practical terms to anyone who needed a man who understood how things were wired. What Jimmy installed during that particular visit was not complicated. A small device on the church office landline that I had sourced through a channel I will not identify. Jimmy asked me no questions about it. I had told him only that I needed to know who was calling whom and when. And he had looked at me for the same long moment he always used, and then said he would handle it. I want to be clear about the legal status of what I did. I am aware of it. I am also aware that it ultimately became irrelevant. Because by the time the hearing arrived, I had documentation that did not depend on anything Jimmy installed. What the device gave me was not evidence. What it gave me was confirmation of something I needed to understand before I could decide how far I was willing to go. I got the confirmation on a Tuesday evening in August. The call came through at 9:47. I was in the back room of the shop with the receiver connected to the monitoring unit, going through property records on the laptop. I had been waiting 3 weeks for a call between the two of them. Most evenings produced nothing. This evening was different. Foley's voice came first, low and unhurried. The voice he used when he was not performing. "The timeline is still holding," he said. The Birmingham attorney filed the preliminary paperwork today. We should have a hearing date within 6 weeks. A pause. I found the Georgia file. Lorraine's voice, quiet, careful, with the particular evenness of someone who has been holding a thing for a while and has decided to set it down. In your desk, Darren Foley. 3 counts of fraud. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted. And Foley said, "And I've been sitting with it for 4 months. Another pause. Longer this time. "How do you want to handle this?" I sat very still in the back room. The laptop screen was open. The ceiling fan in the front of the shop turned slowly in the heat. "I want to handle it the way we discussed. Lorraine said. I don't care who you were. I care about what comes next. You're sure? I've been sure for 4 months. I told you when I came here, I'm not looking backward. A brief silence. Walter's not going to fight this properly. He doesn't have the money for a real attorney, and he won't ask anyone for help because that's not what he does. The guardianship case is straightforward. And the girl, Ruby will adjust. Children adjust. Her voice did not change when she said it. That was the part that reached me, not the words, but the steadiness of her voice, the absence of any hesitation. She's the leverage, Foley said. As long as the case is pending, we have leverage. I know that. That's why we filed. I put the receiver down. I sat at the desk in the dark back room of my barbershop for a long time. The fan turned. A truck went past on the street outside. Somewhere down the block, a screen door closed. 30 years. I had known Lorraine for 32 years and been married to her for 30. I had sat across from her at a kitchen table after we lost Sarah, and before that at a hospital bedside when she lost her own mother, and before that on a porch on a summer evening when she had told me she was frightened about something she could not name, and I had sat with her until the fear passed. I had been present for the things that formed her, or I had believed I was present, which I was now understanding was not the same thing. She had found a file with 3 counts of federal fraud attached to the man she was living with. She had sat with it for 4 months. She had decided it did not change anything. Ruby was not leverage. Ruby was a 9-year-old girl who painted faces and wrote dates in the corners of her drawings and had said I know to her grandmother with a quiet so complete that I still could not think about it without something tightening in my chest. She had used that word. Leverage. I thought about the 4 months Diana Marsh had given me. I thought about the 6 families still unsigned. I thought about 14 deeds already transferred and 208 acres already gone, and a man who had done this in 4 towns and had never once been held for it. I had been patient because patience was the right tool. Because a case built too fast falls apart, and a man who runs before you're ready takes everything with him, and you start over in the next town while the people he left behind have nothing. I had been waiting for the right moment. Ruby was not leverage. That was the moment I stopped waiting. The filing arrived on a Monday. It was a standard legal envelope with a return address from a firm in Birmingham Cross, Whitfield and Associates, which I already knew to be Reginald Cross's practice, which I already knew to be connected to Foley through 3 degrees of documented financial relationship. I had been expecting something like this. I had not known when, or through exactly which mechanism, but I had understood for some time that this was the direction they were moving. I opened it at the kitchen table before Ruby came down for breakfast. 6 pages. The first was a cover sheet with the case number assigned by Monroe County Family Court, the hearing date 4 weeks out, a Wednesday in October, and the names of the parties. Lorraine Elaine Dean. Petitioner, Ruby Ann Dean. Subject minor, Walter James Dean. Respondent. I read it the way I read things completely. Once. Without stopping. Page 2 was the grounds. Mental and emotional instability. Documented by the enclosed medical assessment. Financial insufficiency. Supported by tax records showing my income from the barbershop. Environmental unsuitability. Attested to by 3 community witnesses whose names I recognized as people I had seen at First Baptist in the past year. Page 3 was the medical assessment. It was signed by Dr. Evelyn Parks, who had been my physician for 6 years and whom I had seen twice in the past 18 months. Neither visit for anything that would have produced the conclusions documented on this page. The assessment described a man in cognitive and emotional decline, exhibiting symptoms consistent with prolonged grief disorder and early indicators of depressive impairment. The language was clinical and confident, and bore no relationship to any appointment I had actually had with her. Someone had told her what to write, or had written it for her and asked only for her signature. Whether she had needed much convincing was a question I noted and set aside for later. Pages 4 and 5 were the community declarations. 3 names. 3 statements describing a man they had apparently been observing carefully for some time, noting his withdrawal from community life, his failure to maintain his property, his erratic business hours, and in one declaration, a statement that they had personally observed him speaking to his granddaughter in a manner that had caused them concern. I read all 3. I recognized the structure of each one. They had been composed by someone who understood how these documents needed to read to be useful in a family court proceeding, and the 3 declarants had signed them. And whether they had understood fully what they were signing was, again, a question I noted and did not answer from the document alone. Page 6 was the proposed order, transferring legal guardianship of Ruby Ann Dean to Lorraine Elaine Dean, with visitation rights for the current guardian to be determined by the court at a subsequent proceeding. I set the filing on the table and looked at it. They had spent considerable effort and probably not inconsiderable money assembling this document. They had a Birmingham attorney with family court experience, a falsified medical assessment, 3 signed declarations, a hearing date, a judge, and a formally assigned case number. They had built what looked, from the outside, like a straightforward case against a man with no resources, no legal representation, and a history of isolation following a family tragedy. They thought they were finishing me. What they had actually done was hand me a courtroom, a formally constituted legal proceeding on the public record, and a fixed date on which every party involved would be required to be present. I folded the filing along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. I made coffee. I heard Ruby's feet on the stairs, her particular rhythm, the small pause on the 3rd step from the bottom that she had been pausing on since she first learned to navigate those stairs independently. She came into the kitchen in her school clothes and poured herself orange juice and looked at the envelope on the table. "What's that?" she asked. "Paperwork," I said. She considered this with the economy of a child who has learned that some questions are answered fully and some are answered sufficiently, and that the difference is usually self-evident. She drank her juice and did not ask again. After I walked her to the end of the street and watched her board the school bus, I went back inside and called Diana Marsh. She picked up on the 2nd ring. "We have a date," I said. 4 weeks. Wednesday the 14th. A brief silence. "How complete is the file?" "Complete enough. I need 3 more weeks for the Palmetto account documentation. The 14th gives me time. I'll need everything 10 days before. Clean. Sourced. Full chain of custody. It will be... I know it will. I'm saying it out loud for the record." After I hung up, I looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall. October the 14th. I took a pen and circled the date, something I had done for 25 years when a date mattered. A small private notation that looked like nothing to anyone else and meant everything to me. 28 days. I opened the shop at 7. The first customer was Harold Sims, a retired school teacher who had been coming in every other week since my father ran the place, and who asked as he asked every Monday what I thought the weather was going to be like this week. I told him it was going to be a beautiful month, and I meant it in a way he could not possibly understand. 28 days. I had spent 2.5 years building the file. Now I had 28 days to build the stage. I met Diana Marsh on a Thursday evening at a barbecue restaurant 12 miles outside Magnolia Springs, a place called Puckett's that had been there since before I was born, and that served pulled pork on white bread with a sauce that required no improvement and had received none in 40 years. It was the kind of place that did not attract attention, which was the kind of place I preferred for conversations of this nature. Diana looked the way she always looked, composed, direct, with the particular economy of movement of someone who has spent years operating in environments where efficiency was not optional. She had a cup of coffee in front of her that she had been drinking, which told me she had arrived early, which told me she took this seriously. I already knew she took it seriously. I appreciated the confirmation. I set the encrypted drive on the table between us. 412 pages, I said. 14 families, the full property transfer documentation, the account structures for Meridian Property Holdings and Palmetto Advisory Group, Foley's warrant records across 3 states, and the identification documentation that connects the man currently operating as Elijah Crane in Magnolia Springs to the Darren Foley in those records. She looked at the drive. She did not touch it yet. The medical assessment, Dr. Parks. She signed a document she did not write. Her original patient notes from my 2 actual appointments are in the file. They contradict the assessment completely. I obtained copies through standard records request. The community declarations. 2 of the 3 declarants received financial consideration from an entity connected to Palmetto Advisory Group within 30 days of signing. Bank records. In the file. Diana picked up the drive. She turned it once in her hand, then put it in her jacket pocket. I'll have my team review this over the weekend. If it's what you're describing, it is. Then we'll be ready to move on the 14th. She looked at me over her coffee. Walter, is there anything in this file that came through channels that won't survive a defense challenge? No, I said. She nodded once. It was the nod of someone who had been in this work long enough to understand what that answer cost and what it guaranteed. Then go home and let me do my part. I went home and did the other part. The legal aid office on Commerce Street smelled like recycled air and effort plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, a reception window behind scratched plexiglass, case files on every horizontal surface in the careful disorder of a place where a great deal of work was being done by an insufficient number of people. Nathan Cole had been practicing for 11 months. He was 27 years old and had the look of someone who had finished law school genuinely believing the law was a tool for making things right, and was now in the process of discovering how much friction existed between that belief and family court in Monroe County on a Tuesday afternoon. He had my file open on his desk when I sat down. He had read it. I respected this. He looked at the file, then at me. I have to be honest with you. Mr. Dean, this case is not strong. I know. They have a medical assessment, income documentation, 3 declarations. I know what they have. He stopped. He was trying to figure out if I was in denial or if I understood the situation more completely than I was communicating. He was a perceptive young man. He almost got there. What do you need me to do? He asked. One thing, I said. When we're in that courtroom, I need you to not object to anything I say or do, regardless of what it looks like. He stared at me. That's Mr. Dean, That's not a legal strategy. That's the absence of a legal strategy. I know. Trust me anyway. He sat back in his chair with the expression of a man being asked to drive somewhere without knowing the destination, evaluating whether the driver was trustworthy enough to make that acceptable. If something goes wrong, he said carefully, I need to be able to tell the Bar Association that I had no idea what you were planning. That will be accurate, I said. That is specifically the reason I'm not telling you. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at my jacket, the old corduroy I wore on Tuesdays, which I had not cleaned because it needed to look exactly as it looked. He wrote something on his legal pad, apparently literally. Then he reached across the desk and shook my hand. I drove home and stood in the back room of the shop for a long time, looking at the hook on the wall. The barber's apron had been on that hook for 4 years. $12. Bought the week I opened the shop. Washed enough times to lose the newness. Worn enough to have the shape of the work in it. In the inside pocket of the jacket I had left on the chair was my badge holder, the credentials I had carried for 25 years, which I had not carried in public since the day I retired, which I had kept because a retired marshal keeps his credentials. I put the apron on over the jacket. I walked to the front room and stood in front of the big mirror, the barber, the grandfather, the marshal, all three in one mirror, in a $12 apron, in a shop that smelled like clove oil and old leather. They expected a barber. I would give them a barber. 6 weeks before the hearing, on a Saturday afternoon in late August, I sat on the back porch and watched Ruby paint under the oak tree. She had turned 10 in July, the birthday we celebrated quietly, with a chocolate cake from Hattie Mae and a new set of watercolors I had driven to Mobile to find, which she had received with the gravity of someone accepting serious equipment for serious work. She was sitting cross-legged in the grass with her current sketchbook propped against her knees, working on something I could not see from the porch. Her brush moving with the patient, deliberate strokes she had developed over the past 2 years. She dated every page. She had been dating every page since the first notebook. I had scanned 6 sketchbooks in total by this point. Every Sunday evening, after Ruby was in bed, I would go through the week's drawings and add the images to the encrypted file. The file now contained 472 individual drawings across those 6 books' portraits. Street observations, church events, notations about vehicles and visitors and schedules that Ruby had kept in her margins without ever being asked to. I looked at those drawings the way I looked at all evidence, carefully, completely, and with the understanding that the person who produced them had seen something real and recorded it faithfully. She had drawn Crane 23 times. She had noted his associates, his schedule, his vehicle, his watches. She had drawn the gray suit man twice with enough accuracy that I had been able to use her rendering to confirm identification. She had documented, in the careful handwriting of a child who understood that documentation mattered, the comings and goings of a man whose real name she did not know, but whose patterns she had tracked for 18 months with the consistency of someone who had decided this was worth doing. She had done all of this, as far as I had understood until recently, because she believed it was a game. I went down the porch steps and walked across the yard toward her. She looked up when she heard me coming. For a moment, one hand moved a small, quick motion, tucking something behind her or beneath the sketchbook. Then she was still, looking at me with the expression she used when she had decided how to answer a question before it was asked. "What are you working on?" I said. "No, a portrait," she said. "It's not done yet." I sat down on the grass beside her. The oak tree spread above us, its late summer leaves just beginning to hint at what they would become in another month. The yard had the particular quality of Alabama afternoons in August, warm but not heavy, with a light that came at a low angle and made everything look more considered than it usually did. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." She looked at her sketchbook for a moment. "Not at me." "What did you do before you cut hair?" I had thought about this question. I had thought about it in the abstract, in the way you think about conversations you expect to eventually have. I had not expected it on this particular afternoon, in this particular quiet. "I worked for the government," I said. "What kind of work?" "The kind where you have to be very patient." I paused. "And pay close attention to things." Ruby was quiet. She turned her brush in her fingers once, not painting, just turning it. Then she gave a small nod, the slow, settled nod of someone whose theory has just been confirmed. Not surprised. Confirmed. "Grandpa," she said. "Yes." She was looking at the sketchbook now, at the closed cover. "I stopped thinking it was a game a long time ago." I stayed very still. "Since about the second book," she said. "I could tell by the way you handled them. You were too careful. Real games don't work like that." She glanced at me briefly and then back at the sketchbook. "And I could see you scanning the pages on Sunday nights. The light under the door." I thought about the light under the door. I had not considered the light under the door. I didn't say anything," she continued, "because I could see you needed me not to know. And I thought—" She stopped. She was choosing words the way she did when the words mattered. "I thought if you knew that I knew, you'd worry about me. And you already had enough to worry about." She looked up at me then, directly, with the steady dark eyes she had inherited from Sarah, which Sarah had inherited from me, which apparently carried something across generations that I had never examined closely enough. "Was that okay?" she asked. I looked at my granddaughter, 10 years old, sitting in the grass under an oak tree on a Saturday afternoon, asking me if it had been okay that she had protected me by pretending not to know what she knew. I did not trust my voice for a moment. "Yes," I said finally. "That was okay. Ruby, that was more than okay." She nodded again, the satisfied nod. Then she picked up her brush and went back to work, the brush moving with the same quiet patience as before. I stayed where I was, sitting in the grass. The oak tree moved slightly in a small wind that came through and then was gone. Some things don't have words, not because the words don't exist, but because the words would be smaller than the thing. And smaller is the wrong direction. I woke at 4:12. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when something is about to change and the walls already know it. I lay still for a moment in the dark, listening. No traffic, no wind, no sound from the yard. The ceiling fan had been making a small, irregular sound for a month, a faint tick on every third rotation, and I had not fixed it because fixing it would have required a trip to the hardware store, and I had not had the presence of mind for hardware stores. This morning it was not ticking. I lay in the dark and noticed its absence, which is the kind of thing you notice at 4 in the morning when you have not slept more than 2 hours. I got up. The kitchen was cool. I made coffee without turning on the overhead light, working by the small light above the stove that I had left on for the past year, so the kitchen would not be entirely dark when Ruby came down in the mornings. I stood at the counter and drank the first cup in that partial light, and did not think about anything in particular, which is a skill that takes a long time to develop and is more useful than most people understand. Ruby was at Hattie Mae's. I had driven her over the evening before, her backpack on her lap, the stuffed rabbit she still traveled with tucked under one arm. At Hattie Mae's door, she had turned and looked at me with the particular expression she had been using for the past 6 weeks, not worried, not asking questions, just looking, in the way of someone confirming that things are as they should be. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said. "I know," she said. She went inside. I drove home. I dressed in the dark bedroom by habit, the same way I had dressed in the dark for 25 years of early departures and late returns. The old khaki pants, the work shirt with the button-down collar that I had worn to 3 funerals and 1 retirement party, and that fit the story I was telling today. The barber's apron, folded and in my left hand. The jacket over the work shirt, the same corduroy I had worn to meet Nathan Cole, which still had the particular look I needed it to have. In the inside pocket of the jacket, in its leather holder, was the badge. I had taken it out the night before and looked at it. I had not done this often in the 4 years since I retired, not out of sentiment, not out of avoidance. Simply because it had been in the drawer, and the drawer had been closed, and there had been no reason to open it. I had looked at it for a long time. The photograph inside was 12 years old, and the man in it had less gray in his hair and a different set of things behind his eyes. But the seal was the same, and the designation was the same, and the weight of it in my hand was exactly as I remembered. I put it back in the pocket and left it there. I drove to the shop before I drove to the courthouse. This was not strictly necessary. I told myself it was because I had left a file on the desk that I wanted to confirm was in the lockbox, which was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I wanted to be in that room one more time, in the particular way you want to be, in a place you have spent years in before you do something that will change what that place means. I unlocked the front door and turned on the desk lamp in the back. The shop was exactly as it always was, the red leather chair, the long mirror, the black and white tile floor, the shelf with the clove oil and the shaving brush, and the small framed photograph of my father standing in this same room in 1973. Ruby's corner was empty. The wooden stool she sat on was pushed neatly against the wall, and on the shelf above it was the current sketchbook, the one with the portrait she had said was not yet done. I did not open it. Whatever it was, she would show me when she was ready. I locked the shop and drove to the courthouse. The Monroe County Courthouse was a brick building on the town square that had been built in 1931 and had not been significantly altered since. I parked in the lot on the east side and turned off the engine and sat in the car for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 minutes because I looked at the clock when I parked and when I got out. In those 6 minutes, I did not pray, and I did not review the case, and I did not run through scenarios. I had done all of those things at the appropriate times. What I did in those 6 minutes was look at my hands on the steering wheel, broad across the knuckles, the scar on the left thumb, the callus on the right index finger, the faint smell of clove oil that had been in my skin for 4 years, and that I had stopped trying to wash out because it did not wash out. The hands of a barber, the hands of a grandfather, the hands of a man who had been waiting for this particular Wednesday for 2.5 years. I got out of the car. 28 days had just become the last 6 minutes, and the last 6 minutes were about to become 90 seconds of truth. Courtroom B of the Monroe County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper. It had 12 rows of gallery seating, a raised bench refinished sometime in the 1990s and not since, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly less healthy than they were. It was the kind of room where important things happened to ordinary people and ordinary things happened to important people, and the lighting did not distinguish between the two. Nathan Cole was already there when I arrived. He was standing near the defense table with a cup of coffee from the hallway machine, the kind of coffee that could most charitably be described as hot, and he had the look of a man who had decided to be steady and was reminding himself of the decision at regular intervals. He handed me the coffee. I accepted it. We sat down. There were 2 reporters in the back row. Local press. Notebooks open. I had not been certain they would be there. I was glad they were. Foley came in at 9:41. He was dressed simply dark slacks, a plain jacket, the practiced humility of a pastor attending a proceeding involving a member of his congregation. He sat in the 3rd row of the gallery and nodded at me when our eyes met. The nod of a man who is concerned about someone. The expression was arranged appropriately. I noted it and looked away. Lorraine arrived at 9:48. She was wearing the blue dress she had bought the spring before Sarah got sick. She sat at the plaintiff's table with Cross and did not look in my direction. Cross was good. I want to say this plainly, because it is accurate and because the work he did that morning deserves to be understood for what it was. He was a man who had been doing this for a long time, and who understood how family court worked, the particular weight of certain kinds of documentation, the way a medical assessment lands in a room when read aloud by someone who sounds authoritative. He built his case in 35 minutes the way a skilled craftsman builds something, methodically, without wasted motion, each piece placed to carry the weight of the next. He read from Dr. Park's assessment. He read the specific language about cognitive decline and depressive impairment in the measured voice of a man presenting a diagnosis, and I sat at the defense table with my hands flat in front of me and kept my face in the neutral position I had learned over 25 years to maintain regardless of what I was hearing. Nathan sat to my left. In the gallery I could see, without looking directly, the 2 reporters in the back row with their notebooks. They had been writing steadily, documenting the case against the barber in the $12 apron. His pen moved a few times on his legal pad, and then stopped. His hands were not entirely flat. I noted this without comment. Cross read the 3 community declarations, next 3 portraits of a man observed to be struggling. The unkept property, the irregular hours, the unspecified concern about the manner of speaking to his granddaughter. He named the declarants. 2 of them were in the gallery, 2nd row. They did not look at me, which was its own form of information. Then Lorraine testified. She was composed in the way of someone who has rehearsed composure specifically, as distinct from someone who is actually composed. I knew the difference because I had spent 25 years interviewing both kinds of people, and in 25 years, the difference had never become invisible to me. Her voice was even, her hands in her lap, her gaze directed toward Judge Ashford with the respectful attention of a witness who understood that this particular performance had a particular audience. She spoke for 8 minutes. She described a man who had withdrawn from his community, from the maintenance of his home, from the routines of a person engaging with daily life. She described an environment defined, in her words, by absence rather than presence. She said that Ruby deserved more than absence. Her voice did not break. It did not need to. The voice of someone who means what they are saying does not need to break. I looked at Judge Ashford. She was listening the way she did everything completely, without visible reaction, writing occasionally on the pad in front of her with the measured attention of a woman who had been hearing versions of this particular story for 23 years. She was not performing attentiveness. She was simply attending, cross-rested his case. He turned briefly to look at Lorraine as he sat down, and she gave a small nod. And that exchange lasted about 1 second and contained a private understanding between two people who believed the room was already theirs. It was for 30 more seconds. In the third row, Foley allowed a small controlled shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but in its general neighborhood. The expression of a professional who recognizes the moment when a plan is proceeding as designed. He had been here before, in different rooms, in different towns, with different names. He believed he knew how this ended. Judge Ashford set her pen down. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with the patient, unhurried expression of someone waiting, without impatience, for something she has not yet seen. "Mr. Dean," she said, "do you have anything you would like to say?" I placed both hands flat on the table in front of me. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Quite a lot, actually." I reached into the inside pocket of the barber's apron. My fingers closed around the badge holder. It was exactly where I had put it that morning in the dark bedroom, and it was exactly the weight I had remembered. And I had been carrying it against my chest for 4.5 hours, and it had not felt heavy once. I set it on the table in front of me. I opened it with my thumb and positioned it facing Judge Ashford. I held it there. 1, 2, 3. The courtroom was the quietest it had been since the proceeding began. The kind of quiet that is not simply the absence of sound, but the presence of something that has displaced the sound. Judge Ashford looked down at the badge. I watched her eyes move across the photograph, the seal, the printed text, the designation in the lower right corner. She was a careful reader. She read it through once, and then she read it again. Her face did not change. In 23 years on that bench, she had developed the particular discipline of the experienced jurist, the understanding that whatever you feel in a moment belongs to you, and that the courtroom belongs to the record. She looked up. She held my eyes. "Walter James Dean," she said. Not a question. She was reading from the credential, confirming the name on the badge against the name on the filing. "Deputy United States Marshal, Southern District of Alabama. Retired, Your Honor." The credentials remain valid. A pause. 3 seconds. Then Judge Ashford did what experienced judges do when something unexpected has just happened in their courtroom. She made a notation on her pad, set her pen down, and looked at the side door. The side door opened. Diana Marsh came through first, with the particular economy of movement of someone who has choreographed this kind of entrance before and understands that speed and control are not opposing qualities. 2 FBI agents behind her. A third moved to the right along the gallery wall. They reached Foley in the third row in approximately 8 seconds. I know this because I counted. He stood when they came to him. This was the one choice that was entirely his own in that room. On that morning, he could have sat, he could have argued, but he stood, and I noted it. The first agent said his name, his real name, Darren Lee Foley, and the warrant designation, and the charges. Foley did not speak. He looked at me across the room with an expression I had never seen on his face in 2.5 years of watching him, not the practiced confidence, not the arranged composure, something underneath those, something that had run out of room to hide. He was cuffed. He was led toward the door. He did not look back. The second agent moved to the plaintiff's table. Lorraine sat for exactly 1 full second with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the surface of the table in front of her. I counted that too. 1 second is long enough, when you are paying attention, to understand a great deal about a person's interior. Then she stood. She turned and looked at me. Across the table, across the room, across 2.5 years and 30 years before that. Her face was, I have thought about how to describe this many times since. It was not collapsed. It was not performing. It contained, in the single second before the agent reached her, something that I recognized as the particular expression of a person who has just understood something they had not allowed themselves to fully understand before, and who is experiencing the understanding without the protection of anything to do about it. You could have told me, Walter, she said. Her voice was even. She was not performing it even. I looked at her. I gave you 30 years. Lorraine, that was your chance. She held my eyes for one more second. Then she turned away and went with the agent, and I watched her cross the room, and I did not look away until the door closed behind her. The courtroom had the particular quality of a space through which something enormous has just moved. Cross was standing at the plaintiff's table with both hands at his sides. The two reporters in the back row had stopped writing. Their phones were out. Nathan Cole sat to my left, both hands flat on the table now, staring at the front of the room with the expression of a man who had prepared extensively for a family court hearing and had not prepared at all for what had just happened in the preceding 90 seconds. Judge Ashford made 2 more notations. She signed a document that her clerk had prepared. I had submitted the application for an emergency temporary guardianship order to the clerk's office 3 days earlier, through a channel that did not require Cross to be notified. She looked up. Mr. Dean. She glanced at the barber's apron, then back at me. The smallest possible adjustment at the corner of her eyes, not quite a smile, but its near neighbor. The next time you appear in my courtroom, wear whatever you want. Yes, Your Honor. I picked up the badge holder and put it back in my pocket. I stood. Nathan caught up with me in the corridor outside, moving quickly, slightly out of breath. Can you explain any of that to me? He said. Any of it? Yes, I said. But not right now. You said you'd tell me after. After I pick up my granddaughter, I said, and kept walking. I drove to Hattie Mae's house. The afternoon light was doing the thing Alabama light does in October, turning everything gold and slowing it down, making the ordinary look like something you should pay attention to before it is gone. Hattie Mae opened the door before I got to the porch. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, with the patient, comprehensive assessment of a woman who had been reading the faces of people arriving at her door for 8 decades. And then she stepped aside and called Ruby's name. Ruby came down the hallway with her backpack on and the stuffed rabbit under one arm. She stopped in the doorway and looked at me with the same expression she had been using for 6 weeks. Not worried, not asking, just looking and confirming. Is it over? She said. Yeah, I said. It's over. She considered this for a moment. Good, she said. Hattie Mae made cornbread. Did you save me any? No, she said. But she has more. Hattie Mae made a sound behind her that was not quite a laugh, but was in its vicinity. She handed me a cloth-covered dish. Go on, she said. I'll see you both on Sunday. We drove home in the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. Ruby looked out the window at the October fields going past, and I drove, and neither of us said anything, And the silence was the kind you arrive at after a long time of not being able to have it. At the house, Ruby dropped her backpack by the door and put the rabbit on the kitchen table and looked at me. "I have something for you," she said. She went to her room. I heard her moving around the particular sounds of her searching through something with care. She came back with a rolled piece of paper, tied with a piece of yarn, the way she had been rolling her larger paintings since she was 9. She held it out. "It's done now," she said. I looked at her for a moment. She waited with the patient, certain expression of someone delivering something they have been working toward for a long time. I untied the yarn and unrolled the paper on the kitchen table. It was a painting of the barber shop, the red leather chair, the long mirror, the black and white tile, the window with the afternoon light coming through it. In the chair, sitting the way I always sat when there was no customer, turned slightly sideways. Hands resting on the arms, was a figure she had painted with the accuracy that had been her particular gift from the beginning. Behind the figure was a shadow. The shadow did not match the figure's posture. The figure was at rest, in an apron, hands open. The shadow was standing straight, one hand at its side, the other raised slightly and pinned to the shadow's chest. Rendered in her careful watercolor was a small gold shape, a badge. Below the painting, in her handwriting, small and certain, "This is who Grandpa really is." I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at her. "When?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "About a year ago," she said. "I was looking for Mom's old drawings, in the attic, in the big box." She paused. "There was a folder in there with your name on it. Old Federal ID. Your picture, but younger. It said Deputy United States Marshal." I thought about that folder. I had not thought about it in years, the service documentation I had kept with the things from my career. The things I had moved to the attic when I cleaned out the office after my retirement. It had been in a box with Sarah's old school paintings and the photographs from her childhood, because that was how I had packed at the time, without separating things carefully. Because at the time I was not in the condition to be careful about boxes. I didn't tell you," Ruby said. "Because you hadn't told me, and I thought you had a reason." She was looking at the painting, not at me. I wanted to paint it, though, so I knew what I was seeing was real, and so I wouldn't forget. I had spent 2.5 years learning to count my breaths and keep my face neutral and not let the feeling break the work. I had done this successfully, in this kitchen and in courtrooms, and in the dark back room of a barber shop at 4 a.m. And I had believed I was going to be able to continue doing it indefinitely. I was not able to continue doing it in this particular moment. I did not collapse. I did not make any sound. What happened was smaller than that, a small loosening behind my eyes. The kind that happens when something that has been held for a long time is finally allowed to release. And I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the painting and let it happen. Ruby sat down across from me. She did not say anything. She put her hand on the table, palm up, in the small gesture she had been using since she was 3 years old when she wanted to offer something without insisting on it. I put my hand in hers. She had been protecting me while I was protecting her. Both of us, at the same time, in the same house. carrying the same weight in our separate ways, each one believing the other did not know. Each one deciding that not knowing was something the other needed. We had been doing this for a year and a half, and we had not said a word to each other about it. Two people, one small house, the same secret in different pockets, and neither of us had been alone. People look at what happened in courtroom B and call it justice. They are not wrong. But justice has a cost that does not appear on any document, and the cost is measured in things you cannot recover when the dust settles. The legal outcomes. Briefly, Darren Lee Foley was convicted on 14 federal counts and sentenced to 22 years. I was not in the courtroom. I read Diana's summary the following morning, 2 sentences, no commentary. Lorraine accepted a plea agreement. 5 years. Reducible to 3 with continued cooperation. Her cooperation proved significant. She had documentation of the financial structure that assisted in recovering what remained of the transferred properties. 14 families received notice that their land titles were being restored. Otis Freeman was the first person I told. He sat in my chair the following Tuesday and did not say anything for the first 2 minutes of his haircut, which was the longest silence we had ever shared, and which said everything that needed saying. Hattie Mae's 20 acres remained exactly where they had always been. Dr. Parks surrendered her license. Cross lost his 3 months later. A state legislator who had provided certain regulatory protection to Palmetto Advisory Group resigned on a Thursday and did not respond to questions. I reopened the shop fully in November. The first week back, Hattie Mae arrived Monday morning with a sweet potato pie and the information that she intended to bring food every Monday for the foreseeable future, whether I needed it or not. I told her I appreciated it. She said appreciation was not the point, and went home. Ruby went back to school and resumed the routines of a 10-year-old, with the adaptability of someone who has always understood that circumstances change, and what matters is what you bring to the new ones. She still painted differently now, not with the systematic attention of someone documenting a case, but with the loose, exploratory attention of someone finding out what she sees, which is a different and better kind of seeing. She dated every page. She would probably always date every page. It was Jimmy who asked the question I had been turning over since October. He was in the chair on a Wednesday afternoon in late November, the last customer of the day. We had been talking about nothing in particular for 20 minutes in the companionable way men who have survived something significant together talk about nothing in particular. Ruby was in her corner with a new sketchbook and a cup of hot chocolate that had gone mostly cold. "What are you teaching that girl?" Jimmy said, watching her in the mirror the way he watched everything sideways, without appearing to. I looked at Ruby in the mirror. She was drawing something I could not see. Her head tilted slightly to the left, the way it tilted when she was working out a problem of composition. "How to see people," I said. "How to really see them." Jimmy was quiet. "She already knows how." "I know." "You didn't teach her that." "No," I said. "She came that way." He nodded the slow nod of a man whose observation has been confirmed, and went back to watching the street. I visited Lorraine once, 6 months after the hearing. Ruby had asked to go first, quietly, without pressure. I drove her to the facility and waited in the parking lot. She was inside for 40 minutes. When she came out, she walked to the car with the measured pace of someone who has done something difficult and is giving herself time to finish it. I did not ask what they talked about. It was theirs. The following week, I went back alone. Lorraine was already seated when they brought me in. She looked at me the way she had looked at me across the courtroom in October, not performing, not hiding. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm sad." "Lorraine, there's a difference." She was quiet for a long time. Outside in the corridor, someone walked past, and somewhere down the hall a door closed, and we sat in the particular silence of two people who have said the hardest things and arrived, finally, at the things that are merely true. "I stopped seeing you," she said. "After Sarah, I stopped being able to see you." "I know," I said. "I was standing right there." "I know," she said. I left after 20 minutes. In the parking lot, I sat in the car in the November afternoon, not thinking about anything in particular. People ask me sometimes what I would do differently. I think about that question with the honesty it deserves. I would not do it differently. I would do it the same way, at the same cost, for the same reason. Some things you protect not because you are certain you can protect them, but because they are worth protecting regardless. Ruby is worth protecting regardless. She always was. The shop is open Tuesday through Saturday, 7 to 5. Ruby comes after school on the days she does not have art club, which she joined in November. The mirror still runs the full length of the wall. The chair is still red leather, still good. It will last another 30 years if someone takes care of it. A man's worth is not measured by what he destroys. It is measured by what he is still holding when the dust settles. I have the shop. I have the chair. I have Ruby in the corner with a sketchbook, dating every page. Everything is exactly right. And on the wall behind the counter, framed now in a simple black frame that Hattie Mae found at the hardware store and insisted on hanging herself, is a painting of a barber in a $12 apron sitting in a red leather chair, with a shadow behind him wearing a badge. It is the most accurate thing in the room.